The emergent value frame is about discovering your lucrative new identity. And there are two ways of thinking about the value frame. You can think about it in terms of how it applies to you within yourself, intrinsically, in terms of how you perceive yourself. And then you can also think of it in terms of how it applies to how your clients perceive you, which is the extrinsic perception. In this presentation, I'm going to be focusing much more on the internal perception because who you are and your model of yourself and your identity is the source of the outcomes that you experience. And so, how you think about yourself is the first cause. And then, as a byproduct of that, how your clients think about you will catch up to reflect that internal identity shift. And so I'm focusing here more on how the value frame is actually useful within your own psychology, useful for you as an entrepreneur in terms of thinking about who you are and what you do. So let me tell you a story about an entrepreneur that you might be all too familiar with. And this is the story of John, who starts out as a professional in his field. He's got a series of expertise, he's got some knowledge, some wisdom, and he decides to take the leap out of the business or the kind of work environment, and he wants to start his own business and make more money. But he quickly discovers that building this thriving online business is not as easy as he thought it would be. And his social media content isn't engaging or converting in the way that he knows it could. His sales calls feel pushy, awkward, salesy, like he's trying to convince people. And he has low investment clients, a high churn rate, poor results, and poor testimonials. Basically, people come in, they're not super invested, they leave quickly. It's not really working for him. So all of this means that he has to constantly chase new clients to keep the business alive. He's essentially running on a treadmill, or he feels like Sisyphus, endlessly trying to push that boulder up a hill. And I call this a vicious cycle because low prices lead to low investment, lead to low results, which leads to low testimonials and low business growth. Now, if you resonate with John's story, then this presentation will explain the counterintuitive reason why this is happening and why it's actually not your fault. Because this Russian philosopher, he's called P.D. Uspensky, and he was a serious student of the potential that humans have and what they can experience. And what he discovered or articulated was this idea of the free ride. He said that nature can only take us to 50% of our potential. And I think it's even less. I think it's like 3% or 1% of our potential. And if we want to explore or expand more of that potential, then we have to take it into our own hands. And so the story I just told, John's story, is the product of the free ride. That is the level of business success that society will take you up to uh, through its education, through how it teaches you to think about business and yourself as an entrepreneur. And that's fine. That's a great foundation. But this presentation is about using that as a launch pad to explore more of your potential to go beyond the free ride of society. So if you want to experience a different set of results, then it actually only takes a simple shift in perception. And most people think it takes more work, more effort, more discipline. That's a socially engineered belief system designed to keep you trapped in the old model. It's simply a shift in perception. And that shift unlocks the latent energy and potential that's contained within the life experiences that you already have, because you already have all of the skills, knowledge, wisdom, experiences to have a lucrative series of incomes and to have a really lucrative and exciting business. It's just the way that you perceive your past and your skills and your knowledge is limiting in nature. So in psycho-cybernetics, Maxwell Maltz shows how we have identity set points. And he was a plastic surgeon. And what he discovered was that someone's self-esteem was significantly changed by the plastic surgery. And he discovered that they'd connected their self-esteem with their physical appearance. And so when he changed the self-esteem, sorry, when he changed the shape of their face and how they responded to in public, he changed the self-esteem set points that they had. And they started to experience a different level of self-esteem. And he took that principle and expanded it into the idea of psycho-cybernetics. And so essentially, our identity dictates our results in any area. So your perception of yourself, it works as a cybernetic mechanism. So you can think of a cybernetic mechanism like an air conditioner. If the room gets too hot, it's going to turn on and cool down the room. And if the room is too cold, it's going to turn on and heat up the room. And so those set points will dictate your results in any given area of life. And you've got those set points in business, in happiness, in relationships, in really every single area. And the cybernetic mechanism that is your mind will constantly calibrate your outcome, your results, in order to match the identity model that you have within. So you're constantly trying to match your external reality to the internal reality. And that's the reason why you cannot outperform your deeply held sense of self, as we've heard so many times in this group, if you've been a part of this up until this point. It's because your deeply held sense of self is the foundational lens through which your results are created. It sets the upper and lower limits. And if you leave those upper and lower limits, you will attempt to get back within them as quickly as possible. So you probably experienced this in action. If your income goes too far below what you're used to or what you're comfortable with, you will scramble to get back up to baseline. It will become a priority. You'll become fully focused, fully locked in to get that income. And as soon as you get back up there, it's fine. You got back into your set points. If it goes too far, and this is where it gets really counterintuitive, because as soon as your income goes too far above what you're used to, you'll actually find a way or an excuse or a reason to get rid of that money. And so maybe you'll have an accident, maybe you go on holiday, maybe you give a gift. Some way you manage to get rid of that money because having the money introduces cognitive dissonance. It essentially creates an uncomfortable experience where your identity doesn't feel comfortable with that increased income. And so it finds a way to give it away because the identity is always the highest point within the psychology. So it's not possible to change your results without changing this underlying identity structure that's the source of your results, because these results are simply a byproduct. They're the surface level manifestations of your identity onto the material world. And so you're constantly in this material world creation process. You're creating your reality and you're creating it according to the identity structure that you hold on a deep subconscious level. However, social engineering ensures that you focus on changing the results. It wants you to change the secondary process rather than the primary process. It wants you focused on the outcome of your identity rather than the identity itself. And that's why there's all of these social media messages around working harder, more discipline, more pain, more hustle, more grind. It's because those messages are designed to keep you in the effect, not in the cause. But what I'm really interested in is why people take on limiting identity structures in the first place. You know, let's examine this free ride. Let's examine what society gives you and where it takes you to in terms of what kind of identities are available. So social engineering designs an identity for you, which has certain embedded set points for results. Now, in business, but also in really every other area of your life. And if you don't do the work of basically designing your own identity structure, then you will continue to be trapped within somebody else's and continue to achieve the results that they have intended for you to achieve and create. Society asks us to take on and identify with pre-designed masks or personas in order to fit into and play our roles as cogs in the bigger machine. And these pre-designed masks ensure that we stay predictable, obedient, and of service, which are the three pillars that social engineering wants to achieve in a population. And so it designs all of these different roles and identities. And if you've done a career examination at school, for example, school will always funnel you into one of these identities, one of these masks. They seed and prime that idea throughout the schooling experience. And then I just always remember back to taking a career test or like a career exam. It's like, well, which career are you going to be in? And so from a really young age, you're taught this idea that you will pick up a label. I'm going to take on that identity. I'm going to take on that role. And we could also open up a discussion around identification and attunement, from a really young age in terms of attachment to material objects like blankets and toys, and then how that evolves into attachment to ideas, and then how that evolves into attachment to roles later on in life. And that's a bigger discussion. If you want to have that at the end, then that's open as well. So you can tell if you've taken on a mask if you or others use a label to explain what you do. The label represents that you are a commodity. And a commodity is a replaceable economic good which can be interchanged for any other of the exact same kind. And so every chiropractor in the mind of a client can be interchanged for every other chiropractor. And the label contains within it, so the label contains within it the set points which dictate your potential higher and lower. And so if we go back to this slide on the conditioning, predictable, obedient, and of service, the best way to create a predictable population is to ensure that they align themselves with predictable labels, which have pre-engineered behaviors, set points, ways of thinking, etc.
Mm.
So each label operates as a commodity, which means that it's fungible. And I don't know if you got into the world of NFTs like over the last few years, but this word became really a big word. I never heard of it before, but it's now really important. Fungibility means that any unit of that economic good can be exchanged for any other. And so one barrel of oil is worth exactly the same as another barrel of oil. So when you use a label, you're becoming fungible. You're stepping into this anonymous mask where you can be interchanged with anybody else. So this limits not only how your clients perceive you, but also how you perceive yourself. And it creates that identity mechanism, which then goes on to act as your psycho-cybernetic reinforcement process. If you have that identity of chiropractor or of coach or whatever label you've picked up, that becomes the mechanism that you then go and create your reality through. It becomes the limited experience or window. And one of the ways that it actually limits your ability is through how you perceive your ability to provide value. So this horse here has got blinders on, and the blinders essentially ensure that it only looks in the direction that the handler wants it to look in. And so I think a label really acts as socially engineered blinders, which narrow your field of perception to only be able to see a certain way of exchanging value or a certain way of being valuable. And so socially engineered frames, they ensure that you see value in the labor that you can provide. And so it's that labor, time for money experience, which is really prioritized as a part of all of these labels. And so we'll come back to this later. It's an important pillar. When you use a label, you ensure that prospective clients put you in a box, which is built out of their past experiences of what the label does and is. Because if somebody confronts a label, they immediately attach all of their past experiences with that label onto you. So if they've had a bad experience with a chiropractor or a coach or anything like that, suddenly all of that baggage is going to come along and be put on you. And now you've just essentially given away control of your perception to somebody else. You've given it to them. So you're saying, well, you can decide how I'm going to be seen. Take this label, and that label has all of this stuff hanging off of it. Typically, when someone hears a label, they're not seeing you as uniquely valuable. They're not seeing you through the eyes of what you've got to offer or what they can experience. They're just thinking about you in terms of your career, what you do. And so they're not really introspecting on the benefits to them when they're listening to you. They're just thinking about who you are from a very observer kind of standpoint. They're not really invested in you at all when they hear your label. So this isn't a big problem because labels work completely fine in the commodity environment. If you're in a job and somebody else um, gets clients for you and you handle your role within the company, then that's completely fine. You don't actually need anything different. You can use a label. The issue is when you move into this enterprise environment where suddenly you're the one who's responsible for getting clients. You're the one who not only does the work, but also brings the money in to pay for the work. Well, that's like driving this kind of car in the desert because you've got the wrong vehicle for the wrong environment. So you're not going to get very far. And so that's what a value frame is. It's a new vehicle for this new enterprise environment that allows you to get rid of the dissonance that exists when you carry over this old technology, which is a commodity label, and you try and use the old technology in a new environment. Enterprise environments require much greater mental flexibility than a rigid label can provide. If you've only got that one tool in your tool belt, I'm a chiropractor, you're not flexible enough to handle the different situations that an enterprise environment is going to throw you. So the main limitation I wanted to focus on today with labels is that they're me-centric. And this is important because it's really connected to your self-esteem, and it's really connected as well to your ability to overcome kind of imposter syndrome and step into a confident, self-assured role. And so I wanted to focus on me centricity here because when you use a label, you're introducing yourself talking about you. So you're talking about what you do and how you do it. And what that means is that somebody has to step into your world to really understand you. You're not speaking in their language straight away. You're just speaking in yours. And so you've probably experienced this if you introduce yourself and someone kind of just nods in agreement and moves on to the next topic. That's kind of the normal thing that would happen in a conversation. But when you use a value frame, you introduce yourself and that then becomes the whole conversation. And so I actually experienced this the other day in a cafe where I just met a stranger and I was having a conversation with them. And so I asked them what they do, and they said some kind of label or something. And then they asked me what I did, and I told them a story about an outcome they could achieve. And then the rest of the conversation was about that story and about that outcome. And so you can kind of create and open a world of possibilities within any conversation that you have when you have a value frame to present yourself through. And that's a really exciting opportunity. Um, so me-centrism is difficult because it uses jargon, and you're speaking from within your area of expertise, and that makes you uninteresting to clients because it makes you cognitively expensive. And when you're speaking from within your world, it requires energy and investment for the other person to leave behind their world, their experiences, and step into yours. It takes effort and it requires cognitive cash on their part. And so they're going to be resistant, and essentially it's not going to be an easeful process for you in terms of marketing. So it's a source of friction. They'll be thinking about how much you charge. They'll be thinking about the risks of working with you instead of introspecting on the benefits they could be experiencing through your products and services. And so that's why using one of these labels and not just the label, but the associated way of thinking that comes with the label is the source of friction in the sales process. It's what makes you feel pushy and forceful and trying to convince someone to buy something rather than allowing them to easily step into your world. And so, yeah, this is why, again, that Sisyphus metaphor is so good. You're confined to selling, convincing, and chasing prospects.
Could I hop in really quick?
Please,
Okay, thank you. So one thing I want to highlight with this, when we think of clients, I've had various conversations with different, with all of you, and I understand that some of you may perceive like, oh, well, I'm not selling directly to clients, or I'm not like an entrepreneur who's selling a product or selling myself or selling coaching. That said, like for example, Claire or Rhea on this call, right? You guys have very specific superpowers. Both of you, I would say, fall into like community, wizard building, amplifying missions vibe, right? So not really a label for it, yeah. And yet you guys are calling in a specific match to an ecosystem, which to me is the same as a client, right? So any of us, even if we're looking to be in a specific position in the world and be valued a specific way, this same thing applies. So it's not just the one to one or the one to many. It's about you magnetizing being valued in an ecosystem that no longer is constricting you to a label that's been predefined. So I just want to offer that to you guys as you continue to listen through this.
I think that's a great expansion on the idea. And it also reminds me of some another element I want to add in, which is that even if you don't use a label, and even if you're not someone who kind of resonates with that idea of the label is just the surface level product of a deeper way of thinking. And so it's likely that even if you don't recognize yourself as using a label, you're still stuck in the way of thinking of the commodity, which includes speaking through logic, speaking through your expertise, speaking in a way which is about you, speaking in a way which asks the other person to do effort to understand you. And so the label for me is just like the surface level representation of this underlying way of being. And that's a much bigger world to talk about is the way of being. But just addressing the label makes it really simple and easy to understand. So this, we talked about Paul talked about inhibition in the last call, and so for me, this is the source of inhibition because the client or the prospect, they're not thinking about an exciting beneficial outcome. They're thinking about you, and they're thinking about your expertise and your world of jargon. So you're packaging yourself in the language of the process rather than the outcome. And as we learned, inhibition literally shuts down the ability to perceive opportunity or future gain. So their brain cannot perceive possibility. It cannot perceive opportunity when you use this language. And this forces you to push pain to get them across the line, which is the lowest form of motivation. So everything about using a label and the commodity frame is meticulously socially engineered to keep you in aligned with the lowest sources of power. It's meticulously engineered to keep you at the lower end of your potential possibility because that's where you're most predictable. That's where you're more likely to go into debt. That's where you're more likely to be a good worker and consumer. And so that's okay. We can just understand that and then build something more powerful on top of it. So Buckminster Fuller's infamous quote reveals the solution to this vicious cycle. And this is my favorite quote of all time. And it's that you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. So if you don't know who Buckminster Fuller was, he was an incredible inventor and thinker um, over the last kind of 75 years. And he invented these things called the geodesic dome, which is kind of like the most efficient way to build a structure using the least possible materials to create the most mathematically perfect kind of structure. Um, and that was just one of his inventions. And he was just incredibly good at finding the highest point of leverage in a structure. And they called him Mr. Trim Tab because the trim tab is the tiny little rudder at the bottom of the boat and the trim tab has a tiny impact. It just makes a tiny shift, and that 1% shift creates a cascading impact in where the boat's going. And so he wanted the thing he wanted on his gravestone was call me Mr. Trim Tab because of his ability to find, pinpoint, and act on the point of highest leverage within a system. And if you imagine a kind of a steam train going along, there will be one point on that steam train, one kind of tiny little cog that if you press that cog with just the weight of your finger, you'll be able to bring the whole engine to a stop. And so that's that highest point of leverage within the machine. And that's the foundation of what we can start to explore on the other side of the coin, on the other side of the free ride, is instead of aligning yourself in a socially engineered way with the least point of leverage and having to effort and having to hustle and work and discipline and all of that stuff, it's about perceiving in a new way who you are and what you do so that you can align yourself now with that point of leverage where 1% effort has a cascading impact on everything else and has a transformative, I'm just using a lot of words now, but a really like quantum, I love this word, like quantum leap. It's when you align yourself with this trim tab, with this point of leverage, you get to experience a quantum leap in your results. And if you're interested in that concept, then I highly recommend Power versus Force by David Hawkins, which is about that um, quantum leap in consciousness. Buckminster's wisdom points us to the insight that instead of attempting to hustle, work, and effort your way to a more powerful label, climb the corporate ladder, CEO, CFO, manager, all of that stuff, it's time to let go of the idea of limiting labels entirely and step into your own unique category of one. You may have heard of this idea of a blue ocean. And so if you're in the label commodity frame, you are a commodity, you're in the red ocean, and you're competing for clients based on price because people are looking for the best price because what else can they measure if everyone has the same label? Well, I just need the cheapest price. So you're in a vicious downward spiral. But when we think about building a new model that makes the existing model obsolete, well, let's transcend this idea of the label completely. And so this shift opens up the possibility of a new story. And this is the story of Sally. And so she decided to take a different approach and she consciously took control of how she perceived herself and how her clients perceived her rather than allowing social engineering to control the frame. Sally publishes high converting content that's magnetic to her ideal clients as a result of this new perception. She doesn't take sales calls. Prospects pay her for a conversation where they get to qualify themselves for her high ticket offerings. She doesn't do sales calls anymore. Sally's clients are deeply invested in her offerings, financially, mentally, emotionally, and they achieve incredible results because of that investment. And so, they call it paying attention for a reason. And so, if you've really invested heavily into something, how much more density of attention are you going to give it? And so, you can see that if you're trying to charge the cheapest price as a commodity, your clients are going to be loosely invested in your offerings. And that's why it's a vicious cycle because they're not deeply invested and they don't get incredible results, meaning you don't get incredible testimonials. But when you can tell a new story about what you do that can justify a high ticket income, now you're giving people permission to invest. And I like to say that your price should be in the benefits list. It's not a negative. You have an opportunity to allow someone to invest heavily in themselves through you. And that's what building a value frame allows you to do. It allows you to take on the identity of someone who is able to justify delivering and providing that high investment opportunity to clients. Sally's clients can't stop talking about her business and their incredible personal transformations. And this just makes her incredibly attractive to future prospects. Whereas using a commodity frame actually makes you repulsive because, again, it's cognitive effort and it's cognitive work to engage with you. And that's like education, learning. It feels like school. This feels exciting and interesting. So these are the kind of results that discovering your value frame can unlock for you because of the internal and external shifts in perception that a value frame creates. And it allows you to move into a virtuous cycle where your business success creates greater and greater business success, just like this flywheel here, which just builds momentum and just keeps powering itself. However, I understand that stepping out of the safety of the commodity frame label isn't easy. And there's a reason that most people will take the free ride and stop at the top of the free ride. And that's because it's normal, it's easy, it's the route of least resistance. Because if you have to start designing your own identity, well, suddenly you open up all of these questions. Well, imposter syndrome, aren't I a fraud? What qualifies me to say this or that? And that's why it's so useful to think about discovering your value frame rather than having to create it. It's not something that you now have to go out and build. It's actually something that already exists. It's just about changing your perception of what already exists so that it can reveal its value to you. Artistically designing or discovering your value frame means changing the way that you think about your life's experiences so far. Because everyone has unique expertise, experience, and wisdom. Every single person on this call knows incredible amount of things about things that I have no idea about. Uh, and you can say that about every single person. But most people cannot see the inherent value contained within their experiences because of the blinders on the horse. And this is called the curse of knowledge, which essentially means that you can't remember a time when you didn't know what you currently know. And that's kind of the default state of most people is they're trapped in the curse of knowledge where they think that just because they know something, everyone else must know it. But this is kind of disproven by the fact that there are YouTube channels with tens of millions of views teaching people how to tie a tie uh, or tie shoelaces. And that's because as the industrial revolution is kind of, or the technological revolution is spreading around the world, there are all of these countries which are being integrated into the new kind of Western economic paradigm. And there are tens of millions of people who are needing to learn what we think of as kind of basic skills. And so these channels are sharing information that everyone else is taking for granted, which is I know how to tie a tie and building just huge businesses off of that because I'm sure they have a monthly subscription on the back end for fashion choices or something like this. So your unique wisdom contains incredible value. It's just about changing how you see it. Um, if anyone's read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, that book starts with a great story about a homeless man who's sitting on a crate and a kind of person walks past and he says, well, can you spare any change? He says, no, but I think you should look into that box that you're sitting on. And the homeless man, he doesn't take him seriously. He doesn't look in the box. But eventually that kind of little thought kind of worms its way into his mind. About the next day, he actually opens up the box and he finds that he's been sitting on bars of gold this whole time. He's been incredibly wealthy. And that's how all of us are with our socially engineered perception. We cannot see the just incredible bars of gold that we're sat on in terms of the unique experiences and offerings that we have available. And discovering a value frame is about changing your perception of what you've already experienced so that you can see the inherent value contained within it. You're not just a scientist, you're also, sorry, you're not just an artist, you're also a scientist. And you start to see your unique experiences as your greatest asset because all of the experiences you've had so far have been experiments. Now, every single person in a commodity frame is going to have a unique way of thinking about that commodity situation. If you're a chiropractor and you've got 10 years of experience under your belt, that's 10 years of personal experience, experiments that you've been running. And so you're going to have a unique philosophy on chiropractic that no other chiropractor has. And I call this a data moat. And so that's 10 years of personal data that you've accumulated in your specific niche. And if you pull that data moat out and present yourself through that, that data moat becomes the foundation of your value frame. That answers the question, well, what qualifies me to do this? Who am I to say this? It's like, no, I've been discovering things. I've been scientifically running experiments for the last 10 years. And this is what I've discovered. This overcomes one of the main problems that people face when they're attempting to step into a value frame, which is that your value frame doesn't have the structural integrity to withstand interference patterns that come from both inside and outside. And if you've tried manifestation or um, affirmations and tried to reinforce your new identity through means like this, then what you're experiencing is that the identity itself isn't strong enough to hold itself in place. And so you're having to constantly reinforce it with these affirmations and positive thinking and things like this. And that's because the new identity structure that you're creating or reinforcing doesn't have structural integrity. It's weak. It's kind of it's you're having to constantly reinforce it and create it. And that's why thinking of yourself like a scientist is so valuable. Because when you pull out your value from your past, from the experiments that you've run, it's grounded in something tangible. It's grounded in something real. And now your new value frame is built on top of this really strong foundation. I tried to include the kind of metaphor of the blockchain in here. I just couldn't quite connect it, but I want to include it here anyway. I just think of it like the blockchain, where the longest chain has the most integrity. And so when you're thinking about validating a Bitcoin transaction, for example, you want to validate that transaction against the longest record of previous transactions. You don't want to use a short record because that long record represents the accumulated transactions over time. And so if you can take the same principle when constructing your value frame and build it on top of the deepest well of evidence within your past experiences, For example, if you've been a teacher for 20 years, you can change your perception of what it meant to be a teacher for 20 years. What if you were a scientist running experiments in the classroom to figure out exactly a new way of teaching that no one's ever thought of before? And you have been doing that, but maybe you couldn't see that you were doing that because you were blinded by the blinders of the label. That's why the data moat is the foundation of your value frame. And it sets you and your unique philosophy apart, allowing you to step into the role of thought leader. And that's what I want to say is that every single human has the potential to be this thought leader because we're all individuals. We all have an individual perspective. But again, we're blinded by the conformity of the label to think that our unique experiences don't have value, that the only thing that has value is our ability to provide labor. So yeah, this answers that question, the imposter syndrome question. Discovering your value frame isn't about changing what you do. It's about changing your perception of how you do it. You don't value your labor. You don't value the hours that you spent doing the thing. What you now value are the skills and knowledge that allow you to do the labor that you're doing. Because labor is attached to a linear measurement system. There are 24 hours in the day, which means there are 24 units of labor that you can provide. So that inherently is a set point that's been established for you. And you pin your identity to this linear measurement system of time. But then on top of that, not only are you trapped in 24 units a day, but you're also trapped in whatever your label can charge per hour. Because if you're a chiropractor, you can't charge $2,000 per hour for chiropractic because because people are looking to compete with you on price. So you're trapped in two ways. You're trapped in time, but you're also trapped in how much you can charge per unit of time. When you move into this new space, and this is an ancient Hermetic image here, represents perfectly for me the transcendence of linear time and exploring worlds beyond the free ride. You get to align yourself with so much more expansive and exponential measurement systems. Rather than measuring your value through the amount of labor or time units that you can provide, you measure your value through the wealth of knowledge, experience, and skills that you've developed. And those knowledge, experience, and skills can be distributed to 8 billion people in many different mediums, ways, possibilities all the time, or and even more markets if we discover aliens. And so
Giggling.
that's the shift. Yeah. That's the shift. You can align yourself with a measurement system that actually allows you to achieve those exponential incomes. And it's also a shift in how you think. And so a mindset aligns itself with time, which means that it's stressed, which means it's in scarcity, which means that it doesn't have enough time. Mind flexibility allows you to move out of that measurement system and poke your head through, as our Hermetic man here is doing, and start to measure yourself in terms of depth of new value that you can provide through all of these other mechanisms. So we talked about how building a value frame allows you to change your perception of self, which is what I wanted to focus on for this presentation because I think it's the foundation and the most important thing. But it also changes how your clients perceive you or interact with you. And I just love this image. It kind of represents for me what's going on in the mind when you present through a value frame. When they hear a value frame, suddenly there's a world of possibilities of being helped, of moving into something exciting and new compared to a kind of dull experience on the other side. When you present through a value frame, you're no longer me-centric, you're now client-centric. Taking control of your identity, both internal and external, asks you to step into the role of storyteller. And this is the exciting shift, and this is what Buckminster Fuller meant and applied to this situation was you don't build a better label, you completely change the medium of how you think about yourself. And so we can pick up this idea of storytelling. Instead of introducing yourself through a label, what if you told a story about who you are? Going into your unique past, your unique perspectives, your unique wisdom with this new intention, you discover a unique and interesting story which emerges to replace your old label. And that story is about the value that you can provide to lucrative clients and who you are to provide it. And we've already discussed that you are the scientist who spent those 10 years figuring out what that value structure is. Packaging yourself in the symbolic language of intangible value. And so intangible always commands higher prices, makes you instantly attractive and interesting to lucrative clients. And it's the intangible value that commands higher prices because it speaks to a higher part of the psychology. And so when you're speaking the language of tangible, it's very important to speak the language of tangible, but you're speaking to the decision brain, the primal brain when you speak intangible. And that's great. You need to tick that box. But you also need intangible if you want to sell higher ticket because the intangible is the indescribable. It's the powerful. It's the transcendent. It's the deep emotional experience that they can't put words to. And so if you can package yourself in that deep emotional experience, that's what people want to buy. They want to buy those profound, transformative experiences. And there's an idea called the generative imprint, which is something you could investigate if that intangible, transformative idea is interesting to you, which is a concept of what would the most transformative and intangible experience be for someone is that generative imprint. And in fact, I'll share that at the end of this presentation. So when you package yourself in the symbolic language of the story, you become instantly attractive and interesting to lucrative clients. And that's because of how the human brain has developed. Stories are the oldest human technology, and they're instantly recognizable on the level of your prospect's decision brain. So the decision brain understands story structure below language, before language, making it difficult for them not to pay attention. It's difficult to turn away when you start hearing a story because your decision brain just has to listen. It needs to listen because you're connecting with that ancient primal intelligence. Um, and I watched a really interesting video which has stuck with me, which was about how would you preserve nuclear warning signs into the future? Which is a really interesting question. Let's say you've got a nuclear waste site and you want to ensure that no humans in the future go digging, and bring up this nuclear waste. How do you convey that message 10,000 years into the future? What kind of technologies are available? So you could put up a sign, but what if weather conditions and what if the language changes? You could build a structure, an imposing structure, but what if that imposing structure looked curious or interesting to future civilization? So you don't know how their culture will evolve or change. And the conclusion the video came to was to start a religion about the nuclear waste and the impacts of going into that nuclear waste site. And so the power of the story to transcend time. And you can think about a story, when you package yourself in a story, you package yourself in the transcendent, which is emerging to be a really important theme here. You transcend that linearity and you package yourself in something which is inherent. And so in ancient cultures, they have the polytheistic gods, and those gods are representations of the transcendent elements of humanity which animate and exist within all of us. So you have the god of love, you have the god of war, you have the god of family, or whatever those different gods are. And then each individual is thinking of themselves as a vehicle of those different essences which are transcendent. And so that's just another representation of how powerful those stories are. And so this comes back to Mr. Trimtab, because how can you align yourself with the highest point of leverage? And if we know that the human brain inherently craves stories, inherently deep within its ancient limbic system, it's embedded in there below the level of language, below conscious intelligence. If you align yourself with that, how much leverage have you got? Why are stories so irresistible? It's because they contain the promise of a valuable informational payoff that will teach someone useful information about how to deal with difficult situations. And I think stories are the most, not only the oldest, but the most powerful human technology because they allow us to decentralize learning. When I learn something, and so the typical archetypal story format is order, chaos, order. at a new level. So order, chaos, order. You'll see that story format everywhere. And whenever I package information in that way, it contains the promise of a payoff because it's not order, chaos, because that's just death. And then I'm not around to tell the story. So if I start telling a story, that just the fact that I've started telling the story contains valuable information because it means you're going to learn a new way to deal with chaos. And so humans have collectively generated all of these different ways of dealing with chaos, and we combine those stories together to create what Joseph Campbell calls the monomyth, which is the story that transcends cultures. And so that's the story that emerges in every single human culture that we've experienced, that we've discovered. And there's 12 stages to that story, and that's a hero's journey. And that story is the reason that uh, industries like Star Wars and Harry Potter are worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It's because they're just tapping into the highest source of leverage. They're just aligning themselves with this inherent human thing that exists. And the people watching those stories understand them on a level that they don't even understand. They understand them on an archetypal primal level, and they don't necessarily understand why they enjoy watching the story. But something in them loves watching the story because the story gives them incredibly valuable information about how to deal with the world. So whenever you hear a story from someone, they're updating your model of how to deal with chaos, how to deal with complexity. So just by telling a story, you are immediately offering someone a piece of valuable information. It's like triggering a tripwire and saying, oh, gotta listen. Humans are intrigued. They can't not listen. If you're interested in discovering more about that, then I recommend Maps of Meaning by Jordan Peterson, which is about the transcendent stories and how humans relate to them. Yeah, I think it's his first book. Just try saying once upon a time to a group of strangers. You will immediately have their, if you walk up to a group of strangers and just say once upon a time and just hang there, you'll have their full attention. Like, what's next? And they'll be annoyed if you just walk away because you've offered them the promise of something and now you're not delivering. When lucrative clients hear your value frame, they're not thinking about you, they're not thinking about your expertise or experiences, and they're not cynical. They are introspecting on the potential benefits to them of being involved with you. They are inside their own heads. And this is another reason why using a value frame story is so useful for you as an entrepreneur. Because if you as an entrepreneur are dealing with self-doubt of any kind, or, imposter syndrome, or like, can I do this? Or are they thinking about me? If you're telling a good enough story, then no, they're not. They are not thinking about you at all because you're designing a client-centric bubble around them. You're the creator of a enjoyable, exciting client-centric bubble that they step into. They don't have cognitive space to think about you. They only care about you to the extent that you validate the reality that they are creating, which is why your story as a scientist becomes so important. It's like, who are you to be offering such great things? Well, here I am, a scientist, an artist. It's not possible to be both introspecting on positive outcomes and at the same time putting up resistance and skepticism. You cannot have inhibition and excitement going on at the same time in the brain. You're either inhibited or you are excited. They are either thinking about positive, beneficial, intangible outcomes, or they are thinking about you skeptically with resistance. Who's this person? Or they're just bored and not interested in you at all, which is typically how someone will respond to a label. So a commodified label is about you, who you are, and what you do. The value frame story is about them, what they can experience and how valuable it will be for them to experience it. You package yourself in the language of them. They see themselves. They ask you, what do you do? And you tell them about themselves. Immediately, they're carried away into an incredible story about possibilities. And if those possibilities don't apply to them, they might apply to someone that they know. And so how likely would they be to recommend you? Because they'll get value through the connection. Because if I recommend someone who provides value to my friend, then I get a kickback of value. It's like, you connected me with John. It's like, yeah, I did. So I've got a bit of kind of a value credibility because I was the one that connected him with John. So people will want to connect you with people that they know because they get a boost, they get a status boost out of connecting such an interesting and valuable value frame person to someone that they know and solving their problem. This shift eliminates me-centric inhibition in both you and the prospect. So, two birds with one stone, which prevents you from growing your business or developing as an individual. And so, this image represents the fact that blood flow is no longer limited. And so, you regain access to your higher cognitive functions, and so does the client. So the client also regains access to the ability. Now, this is an oversimplification, this image, but basically they regain access to the ability to perceive positive outcomes in the future, to be excited. And of course, it dissolves your doubts and personal concerns because it's not about you at all. It's about them. This allows you to become cognitively efficient in the mind of your ideal client because they no longer have to do the difficult and hard work of figuring out the benefits of engaging with you. And this is something you'll start seeing all over the place is entrepreneurs who are asking the clients to figure out the benefits. So I had a conversation with a photographer yesterday, and we were talking about how he was marketing his pictures. And he was asking the client to figure out the value of having those pictures in their life. So he was saying, here's a picture. And so the client that buys that has to do the hard work of coming up with the story, figuring out how the picture is going to benefit them, all that stuff. However, if he packaged himself in the story, if he did the hard work for the client, if he brought the story about what that picture will do for them. For example, let's say they live in the mountains and the picture of the sea will connect them to their youth or, show how artistic and interesting they are to their dinner guests or represent their love of human soulful art in an age of AI art or whatever the interesting story is that he can pull out of that. If you do the hard work of packaging or joyful work of packaging yourself in that story, the client doesn't have to do it for themselves. And when you use a label, you're asking clients to do the work. I'm a chiropractor. Well, what does that mean to me? I have to figure out what it means to me. And I have to come up with the benefits myself. Packaging yourself in a value frame allows you to become attractive and interesting to engage with for lucrative clients. And it becomes about the client's buying journey and so much less about your selling journey. So this opens up a completely other world as well. We'll talk about buying rather than selling. Now, everyone is conditioned to buy, and the majority of people will die in debt, which means that they'll spend more money than they have. And so people are going to spend the money anyway, and they're constantly spending the money. And so the question is, why aren't they spending it with you? Because they're spending it with someone. And the reason is that it's cognitively expensive for them to send the money your way because you've been socially engineered to present yourself in a cognitively expensive costume. So if you can learn how to build and design a cognitively efficient costume, that acts like a gravitational well. It acts like a black hole. And water then flows downstream. And so it comes back to leverage. Can you align yourself with the flow of water, the flow of monetary energy? Can you become and package yourself in the language of desire, interest, excitement? Building a value frame, and this is power versus force, it allows you to move out of the space of force, which are these lower states of consciousness down here, which includes convincing, being pushy, being salesy, trying, effort, and you move into the space of power. You let go of the need to try, and now you attract. You allow clients to come into your world. You don't force them in, you allow them in. You're graceful, easeful, joyful. This is not just about getting rid of a label. The label is just the surface. This is about a radical shift in being, in how you exist in the world, in how you relate to clients and money. Your value frame is your birthright. It's your unique potential beyond the free ride, and it can only be fulfilled by you personally because it's built out of your personal experiences. No one else can replicate your value frame since it emerges from your life story up until this point. Thank you for listening.
Hmm. I'm still writing a notes on the last one. That was such a potent line. Your unique potential to fulfill. Hmm.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
any questions, confusions, expanded ideas, comments, thoughts? I'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry about raising hands or anything if you just want to jump in.
I'm curious if you didn't mind sharing. You said you had a conversation with a stranger the other day. I'm curious about how you framed your own value frame, if you can give us an example.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, uh, I told a story about her, and so she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I actually help people figure out what they're really good at, and then pull it out, articulate it really clearly, and monetize it so they can experience more income freedom and more joy in work." And then she just had questions. And so immediately that story then just took the conversation in a completely different direction. Versus I'm a business consultant. It's like, cool. Thanks.
Very helpful. Thank you.
And so does that bring up a memory or a kind of experience that's coming to mind for you in terms of maybe an opportunity you could have said something different or
Um, for me, I guess it's reflecting on there's different types of conversations. Normally, because I have a very unusual lifestyle in life, like there's lots of questions that naturally come up because um, a lot of how I approach conversations is more story-oriented, but it's like creating that framework of why it happens and like rather than me experiencing it, actually like understanding the model itself. And so through understanding the model itself, I can engage with it more intentionally and then more strategically as well. So it's really helpful in that like way.
amazing.
Hmm.
So you're already unconsciously competent.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, occasionally I do the label thing for sure too, but mostly when I don't want to have a continued conversation. Um,
Yeah.
I
Well,
just
that's the
want to
thing.
just be
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Because these aren't bad or good, right? Because you can, if you don't
right,
want to have a conversation, it's like, here's the label.
right. Yep. It depends on the person, of course.
Hmm. Yeah, this is so helpful because and Laurie, I see you on mute, so I'll pass to you next. I know that for myself, I've definitely um and I think this is I've had conversations with many of the people on this call that like a label doesn't work. We're like, fuck, like I don't know what I do and I don't want to do this thing and be constrained by this. And also, I've still gone through the approach of, well, let me force a label on myself that fits then. Like, let me find a label that's then more creative, right? So that they can still understand what I do in this one bite. As opposed to this approach of outcomes and storytelling, like here's the experience of the journey, which then actually doesn't contain me in anything I'm even making up or inventing, which is the same thing as following a commodity frame. I'm just creating new commodities.
Mm. And you can calibrate the efficacy of your story based on how much introspection there is on the side of the other person. Because if the other person immediately puts you in a box, let's say you tell them your story and they're like, oh, so you're like a business consultant. Now you know that your story didn't resonate on that deep primal level because they're not thinking about themselves. They're still thinking about you. It's like, oh, you're a business. They're not introspecting on, wow, that could be so amazing. And then you can tell based on how they ask questions next and make comments how effective your story was. And that when I said mental flexibility in the presentation, another element in this is that you pick up this chameleon idea where you have 5 or 6 or 7 different pre-rehearsed stories, different characters. And so you would go through a discovery process in the conversation. You figure out who you're speaking to, and then you present yourself in the package that the other person would most want you to show up as. And that way, you're constantly calibrating not only the quality of your story, but your efficacy to perceive the environment and match the right story to the right person or the right situation. If you've got 5 or 6 stories under your belt, and then you've got the mental flexibility to be able to tell the right one at the right time.
Would you use archetypes to guide the different stories that you have in your belt tool belt? Like depending on the archetype that a person, represents to a certain degree, you can have a different story tuned to that.
Absolutely. And so, how complex do you want to go with this? You can have different types of archetypal stories available for different types of
Right.
situations. Because maybe
Hmm.
you're looking for a mentor or something. Maybe you're looking to buy something from someone who's got a very strong value frame and you're trying to qualify yourself to them. Well, now you're going to need a story about how good you are as a learner, how coachable you are, how much your commitment you're going to show up. So yeah, I love that. Definitely when you can integrate different archetypes based on the situation you're in.
Right.
So my question is about like bringing structure to this, in that like so from like I can tell stories for days. Like I love telling stories, and uh, I also want them to be relevant to, like you said, like having that mental flexibility, but making it like I guess my where I'm asking for structure is what are kind of the elements of this story of how we add value, so I can build it in a way that does like create that client-centric way.
I'm so happy you asked that question.
Yeah.
Um, and let's explore that now. So the simplest story framework that I like to use follows this idea of order, chaos, order. And that's just because, again, you're just packaging yourself in the most easily understandable framework. And for a visual representation, it looks like this. So I'm
Mhm.
looking to tell a story that looks like this. And you can tell this story in about 45 seconds, 60 seconds. Ideally, you want to have stories which are about 60 seconds long, which follow this format: order, chaos, order. And the idea is to create as much contrast as possible between these 2 points. I've recently been thinking a little bit more about this in terms of not going so heavy on the pain side of things in light of being more excitatory focused, etc. But for now, this is kind of how I've been doing it in terms of creating as much contrast as possible. Because one of the keys of that primal decision brain and one of the ways that it understands the world is through contrast. And so when you use contrast, you are speaking directly to that primal decision brain. And um, let me just bring this in here. And that's why marketing so often uses contrast, because it just speaks to that primal decision brain instantly. It's like you don't need words or language to explain what's going on in this image. That's just boom, lightning fast, perceived, understood, bad teeth, good teeth, solved. And so if you can package yourself with the same principle, and we could get into the 6 keys of the decision brain as well, but ideally, you're taking the 6 keys of the decision brain and wrapping yourself in a story which speaks to all of them. And one of the important keys is contrast. And so the deeper the difference you can make between chaos and order, the more perceivable you are and the more interesting you are, because that's a promise of a bigger reward as well. It's like, wow, this person went into this deathly valley and came out with the gold. They slayed the dragon essentially, and they got the gold. It's like, I need to listen to this because I'm going to go and slay my own dragon, and I need to make sure I get out with gold. Um, so I follow a 5-part story framework, which is essentially problem, consequence, turning point, solution, result. And that's just how I think about building stories with people. Um, I was doing athletics and I hurt my ankle. And because of the training system the coach gave me wasn't really working. And as a result of that, I lost out on the chance to go to the NHL, and that was my childhood dream, and it just absolutely destroyed me. And I spiraled, and I went into a really dark depression, and I just got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore, and it was just terrible, and really, my life was falling apart because I hockey was everything for me. And that's when I decided to take things into my own hands. And over the next 5 years, I actually became a serious, dedicated student on exactly what was going wrong with the kind of mainstream hockey advice and what was it that caused my injury. And I discovered some really interesting things about how mainstream hockey training doesn't work for most athletes. And that's why, out of that experience, I created my three-step solution, which allowed me to get back to sport, playing hockey. And honestly, my life's never been better than before. I'm going to the Olympics next year. So yeah, that's what I do. So that's how you can then just take that. Once you've got that framework in your head, you can spin up stories just like that.
Mhm.
And based on who you're speaking to. And so you just take those 5 steps. So yeah, that's to answer your question, that's what the story looks like. If you're interested in spiral dynamics, this is also a representation of a spiral stage, which is really cool. Um, so we've got alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and then new alpha. So it's everything's okay. Problem, something changed. Terrible time. I can't deal with this. Coming out of the void, figuring something out, and now everything's okay at a new level. And so your story can offer them essentially, hey, look, you're going down here, and if you don't come with me, then you're going to go all the way to the bottom, and you might not get back out. But if you come with me, you can actually skip that. And so you're offering the opportunity to skip the deadly depths of gamma. Now, so we're talking more about excitatory stuff. This kind of applies more on the lower ticket end of the spectrum. When you're selling excitatory, I'm not sure I would push as much gamma talk. I'd be pushing much more excitatory talk, but it's an interesting tool to have in your arsenal, especially on the surface level of your funnel, because most people on the surface of your funnel will be more responsive to pain than pleasure. And so if you're looking to captivate attention, use stories like this. But if you're looking to convert high ticket clients, build stories which are much more focused on the positive excitatory frame. And that's just more of that mental flexibility, is your ability to design stories which fit the different stage of the client journey in your funnel. Cool.
Awesome. Thank you.
I'm curious, Guy, when you were talking before about let's say listening to the client, this chaos part of the storytelling, I imagine, has more impact or uh empowers the individual to focus more on themselves than on me, let's say, if the chaos resonates specifically with them.
Not necessarily. It doesn't actually have to resonate specifically with them. More important than the contents are the structure itself. And so you're just inviting them into resonance in their own story. And
Mm-hmm.
the idea is the kind of people I like to work with, typically their customers have reached a point of enough's enough. And so their customers typically are experiencing quite a lot of pain. And what that means is that they're ready to try something they haven't tried before. And so that allows us to use all sorts of interesting marketing devices, because we can say, hey, look, you've been trying all this stuff. You've tried naturopathy, you've tried acupuncture, you've tried massage. And there's a reason that all of it doesn't work. And it's because it doesn't address this core foundational thing. And then we can sell the core foundational thing. And so I really like to be marketing to people who've reached their point of enough's enough, because it gives us so much leverage to like flip. There's so much potential energy in that. And so
Mm-hmm.
that for me is that point of leverage. It's like, okay, this person's ready to make a serious change in their belief system. I'm going to help them make that change to maybe explore something a bit more spiritual, maybe explore something that was previously outside of their model of the world. It's like, I'm in so much pain, I'm ready to let go of my beliefs in order to experience a new result. And if you're not in that much pain, or you're not ready to let go, then I can't really help you, because it's
Yeah.
like, well, you're in pain, but not enough. And so you're not willing to explore this other side of things in terms of, well, maybe the mind is having an impact on your experience. It's like, for a lot of people, that's heresy. No, no, no.
Mm-hmm.
The mind can't impact my experience. No way. It's like, okay, we can't have a conversation yet.
See you later. Um, okay, cool. So I'll speak a little bit to the where this is going. Like all of you are here, right? I don't know about you guys, but when Guy just said the 6 keys of the decision brain, knowing that contrast is one of them as an element that can be used to make a story um, more impactful, or rather like effective at all.
Mm.
Um, that's something that I'd really want. So you guys know we are brainstorming what comes next of this. And what we're considering is that to make it something that creates the most value for all of you is Guy doing presentations in parallel with Paul offering us information so that we're using some of the building blocks to be able to ask Paul better questions as well, which then creates more value for all of us. And then we're actually taking action in our world a different way. And I look forward to even doing this with a story, which is okay. Um, so that'll be fun. Yeah, so just seating that there. I don't know what it is, but I want to continue inviting you guys to give feedback and just like co-creating with us here and what comes next.
Yeah,
Um,
I got 2 points there. One of them is I actually built that decision brain presentation like 6 months ago. So that one's perfectly locked and loaded if anyone's interested in exploring the 6 keys to that limbic system. Um, I can do that next. And secondly, I think that I can provide potentially a bit more of a down to earth, tangible perspective on what Paul is talking about because I've been listening to him for a really long time and I've had to translate all of his theories and ideas into something that made sense for me. And so if if you find some of Paul's concepts or ideas more intangible or more difficult to get your head wrapped around, it's like I was the same. So I had to like figure out, well, what does this actually mean right now? Like what do I actually do with this today? How do I apply all of this stuff? And so that's kind of the perspective that I'm taking in terms of these presentations is a more immediately usable perspective on the material. Not to say that there isn't immense value on the bigger picture as well, which there definitely is. So both are cool.
does anyone else have any comments or questions? Anybody who hasn't put their voice in the space or who has? Yeah, Ria.
What is the generative imprint? You said you might circle back to that.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop. Great, thank you. I'll drop a PDF in the chat box. It's essentially a NLP concept. Um, Give me a minute.
Good students. I'm so glad. Thanks for tracking, Ria.
Yeah, everyone's asking exactly the great questions. Because I wanted to include that story framework in the presentation, but I was like,
Lori will always bring in the structure. That is definitely one of her superpowers.
okay, I'm gonna find out. I'm gonna put it in the WhatsApp group,
Okay.
and then I can. I don't know if everyone here is in the WhatsApp group.
Everyone except for Rich, but I imagine you'll share it in your expansion group as well. And I'll
Cool.
share anybody here. I'll also drop an invite link to Guy's Telegram expansion group in which he leads voice notes that are like, but like Guy is following your presentation, and so it seems like, oh, cool, he's saying all these words in such a way that are structured and coherent. He just talks like this all of the time without period. So it really raises the bar. If you think mirror neurons work, I invite you to just get into that group and just be surrounded by his coherence. Yeah.
Yeah, I need
Uh-huh.
to. I need some humble juice or something here. Um, I'd love to hear any kind of questions or ideas, anything really that's coming up.
I'd love to ask a quick question with some baby shrieking in the background.
Sure.
Um, okay, so I understand the idea of moving away from the labels. And I guess I have two questions. One is, what do you use on like email signatures and LinkedIn profile, like very simply. And number two is there a place where that actually would be appropriate? Like after having had a conversation with a company who's looking for a wellness facilitator and you fit part of what I do fits that title.
Great question. I think to start answering your question, I would say yes, there's definitely a place for a label, and that incorporates that mental flexibility idea, which is that if you're in somebody else's frame and you don't have, for example, let's say you're an employee, probably not the best situation to start introducing your story through. So in that environment, you want to have the flexibility to be able to take on the role and identity of the environment. What I'm explicitly talking about is when you control the frame. And so a LinkedIn bio, for example, that's actually not really you controlling the frame because it's LinkedIn's frame. Now
Mm.
you can use a really short story, and people do use stories like from pain to joy, from movement pain to movement freedom and stuff like that. And that's now really, really common. Um, I'm just I'm so much more focused on places where you control the frame. And so I want to get your clients off of LinkedIn as quickly as possible. Um, in an in an email signature, for example, um, yeah, I wouldn't be using a label. I think I just have my name, and then the weight of my story would be carrying the rest of uh the frame. So it's really about who's controlling the frame. And so if you can pull the frame out of the situation, then you can now wrap yourself in your story, um, in your own enterprise environment. Does that answer?
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And ideally, I wouldn't, I want people off of LinkedIn as quickly as possible. So they wouldn't really, I'm not really necessarily interested in them seeing my bio because I want them to read my post and immediately comment and then immediately click on my link to my website and now give me the email. And now they're in my frame. And so social media is only really interesting to the extent that it allows you to pull people off of social
It
media.
gets you into your frame. Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, you are in the frame controlled by social engineers.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. Was it Raya? Did you, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
did you have a chance to fully speak or?
Oh no, it's okay. I just wanted to circle back because it's been talking to me. I'm very curious about the generative imprint.
Yeah, that was it.
Okay.
Um,
See you, Ashling. Enjoy your family and dinner. Such a pleasure.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Ashley.
cool. And we'll probably wrap here in the next 5 minutes. I know it's Sunday for everybody.
I think I just found the PDF. It's
Yeah,
just loading.
cool. Okay.
Essentially, generative imprint is like the earliest experience that you have of kind of meaning. And so it's like a deeply embedded, powerful, meaningful, joyful experience that becomes the reference point for the rest of your joyful experiences going forward. And so typically it's something that happens at around like 2 or 3 years old. And it's just like this profoundly, intangibly beautiful experience that is then embedded into your subconscious. And so the NLP idea is like, how do you allow someone to reconnect with that? And so if we're talking about the highest point of leverage within someone's experience, it's like, well, that's going to be that generative imprint, which is from the beginning of their life. So how do you create an environment, which is your value frame essentially, which is an environment, which is your funnel, which is your marketing, which is how you structure a sales call, for example. How do you allow someone to move into that generative imprint experience so they can reconnect with something they didn't even know they had? And that's how you build like incredibly profound and meaningful connections with clients where the intangible value of the service you're providing is unbelievable because no one else is able to allow them to experience that part of themselves in the way that you can. And so it's just about designing those environments that allow them to connect with that experience that they didn't even know that they had. Um, yeah. So I'll make sure that PDF gets out.
I love
Thank you.
that.
Very cool.
Sorry, go ahead. It's okay. Um, is it possible that us being in tune to our own generative imprint, probably unconsciously, could we then elicit more easily that generative imprint from within others?
I would actually say it's a prerequisite because you cannot give to someone else what you can't give to yourself. And so if you are unable to connect with, articulate, and experience that really joyful and meaningful and profound state within you, then I don't see how you would be able to lead someone else to it.
Okay,
Great question. Thanks, Stephanie.
cool.
And that's a really exciting idea as well in every area because um, that's just a principle that I love. If you can't create something in relationship to yourself, then you can't give it to someone else. Um, and that's in reference to your own model of the world. And so I was talking with Veronica about this, is like if you cannot allow your own personality structure within you to exist in an unconflicted way as it is, then you cannot allow somebody else to exist in an unconflicted way as they are. And so you're going to be in this constant conflict. So it's like, well, can you separate from ego, yourself, your own personality matrix, and then meet the entirety of what that is with love? And so that what that means is like who you are up until this point might be entirely socially engineered. It's like you might discover through investigation that every single aspect of your personality up until this point has been designed for you by somebody else to ensure that you stay predictable, obedient, and of service. So the question is then, and that's kind of what I discovered in me. And so I was like, well, how do I like relate to this? Because like now that I found this space outside of that kind of space of freedom, how do I relate to all of that stuff which exists? And the only useful response I found was basically to love it and to be grateful for it. Because it's only from that place that you can allow it to transform and become something potentially useful. Or even if it doesn't, just allow it to exist. Otherwise, it just becomes a source of resistance and drama and friction.
Mm, yeah, I'm gonna re-listen to that part too. I will put this recording in the WhatsApp. I will say that like what Guy just spoke to is what genuinely inspires me to be in these spaces and to be working with Paul. And it is something that I'm looking forward to having a better articulation of in terms of like, this isn't just sales. This isn't like sales and money, right? Like, it is literally this identifying long enough with the constructions of your personality that have been shaped by social engineering and are keeping you in the same patterns and results of your reality, even though your inner listening is like, you can sense that there's so much more potential for expansion, for knowing yourself, for understanding the uniqueness of your true nature and honoring it. And like, that's what this is. And it's so wild how it actually gets to be through the energetics of this thing that we're calling money, because money is just an energetic. It's just one result that we get to use to measure through. And like, why not? Because that would rock, right? To have unlimited potential and have a lot of quan in the game of chess that's on this earth right now. Um, so I look forward to being able to really share that in a story, amazing value frame, and have Guy as a wingman here to invite more people into the experience.
100%. You spoke about it really well. And I think it also points to like letting go of emotional baggage because most of social engineering, what it does is it attaches unnecessary things to other things. And so you can't pick up this idea of money without also picking up all of these uh, uh, socially engineered emotions or stories or ideas or language forms about what money is. And so that freedom is really being able to pick up money and have nothing else come along for the ride. It's like, can I just pick up money and let that exist as it is. And then, well, can I just pick up me? Can I just let me exist as I am without needing anything to change? And that then comes back to power versus force, because it's only from within a space of not needing things to change that you can move into that higher state of consciousness that unlocks more potential. Because if you're thinking about money through the lens of need or want or bad or good or anything, you're attaching something unnecessary to it when simply it's simply just like a medium of exchange, a clean form of energy exchange. So that's another avenue is the de-emotionalization of things, which is a huge part of transcending how social engineering works.
And I think that speaks to what you said about discovery, being the scientist, right? We're actually get to be the scientist of the results that are in our lives and shift and tweak the results of our lives. But the moment we're attached the results or the identity that created the results, whether it's good or bad, for or against the results that we're getting, like if we're defending it in any way, we're now attaching emotional energy to it as opposed to being the discoverer. And it's yeah, it's been a pleasure to be in this experience with Guy and Paul and realize all of the places where I do that, where I've been practiced at doing that.
And
uh,
and this opens up a bigger story as well, which is the story I'm currently really excited about, which is the idea of business as art. And
mhm.
so one of the connections that social engineering makes, which is very personal to me, is it connects work with stress and it connects this idea of work with difficulty or effort. And that's what school does, is it connects work with authority. It connects it with stress, with measurement, with tests, with need. And that's one way of looking at work. And it's the way of looking at work that most people never escape because the rest of society is designed to reinforce that effort-based feeling. But there is, and the value frame, and that's why a value frame is so much more than just a story, because it's a brand new way of thinking. And so a value frame allows a new way of looking at work and business, which doesn't have any of that emotional baggage attached. And suddenly, business and work becomes this joyful, artistic process of designing expansive environments for people to experience more of their potential. And that's just so, I mean, that's my intangible. I can't even put words to it. It's so exciting to me. And to, that's like the bigger picture or the narrative that I'm looking to tell. The bigger story is the potential that, yeah, play, the potential for play to continue into adulthood, and the need for that to happen. It's like,
Yay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a strong finish. I like that there. Um, Amazing. So I will be sending this auto recording. Guy, you'll be sharing the generative PDF. If you guys have questions for Guy, feel free to ask them in the chat, like just at him. And then Guy, maybe you'll also share the invite to your Telegram expansion voice
Oh
note.
yeah.
That'd be rad.
Yeah, I'll drop that in the thing. If you have any questions or you want to have a discussion about anything, you can find me on Instagram, expansion.guy. I'm available. Thank you so much. This was like this was my first ever presentation really, and this was so much better than I could have hoped for. So thank you so much for your attention and thank you so much. Like really, I feel so much gratitude right now. Like thank you for being here and engaging. So amazing. And thank you,
Such,
Veronica, for making all of it happen.
yeah, such a gift to receive. Such a amazing gift. All right. I love all you
Thank
guys.
you. Yeah.
And we'll see you soon. And here's some more presentations.
Yeah,
Bye.
next one's loaded. So drop me a date. All the best.
Love it.
Amazing. Bye, guys.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
everyone.
Ciao.